Dr. Parikh with Writing in Style by Lenore Szuchman again. Chapter 2, let me flip through. On page 12, the bottom reminder box, if you have not read a source, do not list it in your references. For this paper, that's going to happen a lot because you're not reading that many sources. And so a lot of the things, a lot of the ideas you're using, if you were doing a true literature review, you'd probably have 30 to 50 sources. And most of what you would be citing would actually be results of individual studies. But in this case, you're just using a few articles. And so a lot of what you're studying are actually going to be from the lit review. And I really like the way that she recommends to do it. In the past, I've told students, well, it's not really the way you're supposed to do it, but just cite the article you found it in. But I think for this class, because we are emphasizing writing, I don't want to, it always feels weird to me to start you off with, we're going to follow the letter of the rules for all these things, and then here we're just going to cheat. And so for this, just copy the primary source, the source that's, referenced in that literature review, and say as cited in, and then put the citation for the article where you found it. Let's see. Page 16, she gives you a lot of examples of wordings. She talks about redundancy. So under wordiness and redundancy, the second example, the obtained data showed, and she says, just write the data showed. I don't love the word showed. Because it has this sort of implied, this is what it was, and it was definitely that, and we don't really do that so much in science. Instead, use words like suggested or indicated. There's so many ways to say it. Now, showed isn't quite the dirty word that proved is. You will lose points if a final draft has the word proved in it. But with showed, I'm often going to comment and say you really need to change it. And the golden rule for your papers is that if I have made a direct comment saying that you need to change something and you don't change it, well, that doesn't look very good, especially for when you're trying to justify how well you've revised something. Let's see, so that was page 16. Page 18, I just want to draw your attention, number 2 and number 3 on the list of informal language and slang. She talks about since and while. These are words that we use colloquially, which means just sort of in normal conversation and everyday use, to mean sort of however or because or things like that. But when we're doing formal writing, those words are very specific. They mean time. So since would be like since this morning, or since I moved to New Jersey. While would be while I was doing my laundry, or while I was living in Minnesota. And so you want to be very careful. And a lot of these are things that I'm not going to necessarily dock points the first time, but I do want to see improvement over time. The last sentence on page 18, I strongly disagree with. She says, if it still comes out very close to the original, she's talking about quotations and paraphrasing. And she says, if it still comes out very close to the original, you can put the page reference in at the end of the paraphrase. I don't know where she got that. I do not agree with that one bit. It's either a quote and you're using the exact wording and using quotes and giving a page number, or it's a paraphrase. Now, technically, APA style tells you to put a page number in for every paraphrase. That is technically correct. And so sometimes I have students who do it because they use Purdue OWL or some other source that tells them to do that. And I tell them, I'm never going to take away points for that because you are following the letter of the law. But I'm also never going to require you to do that for a paraphrase. That's something we have to do for quotes. There's not an in-between. You need to either quote it or really put it in your own words. And so if you're paraphrasing it and it seems to come close to the original, do not use a page number. And don't go back to quoting it. Workshop it. By workshop it, I mean bring it into class, bring it to office hours, do something. But do not do what she tells you to do. No. Page 19. This is stylistic. Some articles you'll notice they use we or I or us. But for this paper, we're keeping it objective third person. That's just my standard for academic papers. Other sorts of writing, of course, you would use I, but for these papers, do not refer to yourself. That is something that there's at least one point directly tied to it. Let's see. Page 20, a few lines down. Very often, sentences containing you should be rewritten without reference to anyone. And the example they give is, by middle age, vision and hearing have already begun to decline. So in this case, the original said, when you reach middle age, your vision and hearing have already begun to decline. And it's changed to be generic, by middle age, vision and hearing have already begun to decline. It's a passive sentence, which isn't the best, but it's okay. It's straightforward, it reads, and it doesn't use you. You is another word that you'll lose direct points if you include. You can also say, when people reach middle age, their vision and hearing have already begun to decline. I guess the original was, all of it was passive, so making it generic didn't cause that problem. Another way to kind of avoid issues, and we'll probably talk about it again in just one moment. Yeah, let's just kind of skip over there, actually. Page 21 talks about sexist language. So this, I didn't really understand the issues of sexist language until the first year in my grad school program. My first semester, we read a whole bunch of journal articles, and one of them was about like graduate school and what it should be. And it was from the 1950s, important information, and it very clearly referred to fellows and men and had no space for women in that environment. And it was the first time I read something and really felt like I wasn't being included, even though I should have been. And so that really raised my awareness of the importance of avoiding. So historically, things were typically just, male was assumed to be inclusive, and maybe language has changed. Maybe it used to be inclusive. Maybe we're just realizing that women are people too. But either way, it's important to make sure that you're not just using like he and his and him throughout. You're not just defaulting to a male example. Now, how do you not do that? That gets really clunky. Some people will try to switch between both, so they'll give a male example for one thing and a female example for another. And I think that can work really well in textbooks or things like that where you're trying to be very readable. But if your goal is to be neutral and research-oriented, I think there's better solutions. Another thing people can try to do is his or her, S/HE, like he or she, and that just gets so clunky. Do not use he/she. Don't try to do both pronouns, because if you extend it out, it just gets clunkier and clunkier. The best way to solve this problem is just use a plural. Just say people, students, just stay plural throughout. And this is something that's really hard to remember to do when you're writing. It's something I often have to, halfway through a paragraph, I'll realize I've created this weird situation, and so I'll go back and fix it. So don't expect that this will just be easy or automatic, but it is amazing how much easier and more clear and less sexist it is to just use plural. Sometimes it requires switching a sentence around a little bit, but that's okay. It often results in a better sentence at the end of the day. Chapter 2, page 23. Szuchman talks about punctuating things like i.e., e.g., and especially et al. Et al. Is Latin for et alia, which means and other things, or as I like to say, and those other guys. It's important because we use it a lot for references, in-text citations. If you have more than 2 authors, the first time you list all the authors, unless you have more than 5. Yes, these rules are complicated. No, I don't expect you to know them without having to look them up each and every time. So et al. Is et space al period, and usually there's a comma after that and then the year. And it's important to understand how to punctuate it because you'll lose a lot of points if it's not right. So it's very important, and I think it helps to understand that the et is just the word. I assume it means and alia is something about other things. And so we're actually shortening that word. That's why that word gets a period and et doesn't. But it's a mistake students make all day long. The last thing I want to draw your attention to from Chapter 2 is on page 24. There is a wonderful table. Let's see if I can get it in focus, sort of. And this table summarizes a lot of things. It summarizes where things are in 2 different versions of the manual. One is the actual publication manual, which is blue, and I don't have a copy at home with me right now. The other one is the concise rules. It's a nice little spiral-bound, lighter weight book. You can purchase either of them. Honestly, the rules are all online, and a lot of them are in the books you have, like this one, and they're pretty much all covered in the orange APA manual. It's not a bad idea, especially if you want to go to grad school. It's not a bad investment. It's not the most expensive in the world, but I have a copy or 2 in my office that you can always borrow during office hours and possibly even make arrangements to take home with you. The psych department has several copies. Usually our grad students use it, but I would imagine that undergrads can use them also if you go talk with Carolyn Mitchell in the main office. And again, it's only like $25. I know that's not, it's not nothing, but it's not crazy, crazy expensive either. Between the 2, honestly, I would recommend the concise rules for undergrad. If you go to grad school, you may have to get the full manual, which talks a lot about writing, but a lot of that stuff is getting covered in the resources we have now, which are a little more user-friendly. Okay, so I talked a lot that time. I'll try to keep it shorter, but I just want to make sure that I explain to you what's most important to me from this book and the things I don't agree with. So thanks. That was Chapter 2.